Hi everyone and welcome. My name is Rabbi Melanie Levav. I have the privilege of serving as the executive director of Shomer Collective. It's so great to see so many of you returning for yet another program here together and to see so many new faces as well. If you're new to our work, Shomer Collective's work is focused on improving end-of-life care and conversations inspired by, guided by Jewish wisdom. You can read more about all of our offerings on our website. Tonight's topic is the second in a two-part series. Some of you joined us a couple of weeks ago when we had Rabbi Richard Adras teaching us on the topic of caregiving from a Jewish perspective. And we saw the two topics as intimately connected because many of us who are here tonight have had the experience of caregiving or are living in the experience of caregiving now or anticipate being in the experience of caregiving related to someone in our lives who may have dementia diagnosis, or we are familiar with that from other experiences of people close to us. We are doing this session tonight because we know that the wisdom Rabbi Dayle Friedman has to share will help support those of us who are living through this and to prepare us for those who are not yet there, but anticipate this being something as part of our own journeys as caregivers, as people who care about others who are being cared for, who may be experiencing dementia. It is my honor to introduce my teacher in all things end-of-life advanced care planning and colleague, Sally Kaplan, who will facilitate tonight's discussion with Rabbi Friedman. Sally, all yours.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. I think we'll just lead right into introducing Rabbi Friedman, Dayle Friedman, who has developed some wonderful resources and always brings wisdom to the field of aging, and in this case, dementia as well, and is a teacher, a rabbi, a leader. And it's my pleasure to introduce you. And if you want to lead us a little bit, Dayle, into your background and what brought you to this work before launching into your teaching, that would be wonderful.
Okay, I am so happy to be here. And I just really want to acknowledge and thank the Shomer Collective for organizing this conversation. That's not an easy one. And to all of you for coming. We are living through an extraordinarily painful and wrenching time in the Jewish world. And there's absolutely no way that any of us is not carrying with us the fact that 10 people are in the process of getting released as hostages and so many others are not, and the war may or may not restart imminently. So I just want to acknowledge that it is a fraught time. So maybe we can just do whatever it is we need to arrive, take a breath, put a nice hand on the heart. So I have been kind of living in the land of dementia since I was a college student, really, and started leading services with other students who volunteered to be in what they would call now, I guess, assisted living in Boston. And we would go every Shabbat and lead services. And I discovered that people who seemed to be not that present or not that oriented sort of magically became fully present in the presence of the intergenerational relationship and the melodies and the rituals of Shabbat. And that just has gotten me intrigued about the gap between perceptions about dementia and what the reality might actually be like. So I spent 12 years as a chaplain accompanying people living with dementia and their loved ones. And in my own life, I accompanied my dad, who spent some time in a nursing home living with dementia. And now my mom has just recently, in the last few months, moved 2,000 miles to be near me here in Philadelphia in a memory care. And it's a whole new way of experiencing what I thought I knew a lot about. So I just want to say that anything that I offer here is with a lot of humility, because this is an experience that looks very different for every individual, and it looks very different depending on what side of it you're on. But I'll tell you why I'm here tonight specifically. The late Maggie Kuhn, who founded the Grey Panthers, told a group of students I brought to see her when she was about 86, that she resolved when she turned 80 that she was going to do one outrageous thing every day. And I am not 80, but I have passed 60, and maybe I don't do it every day, but I do get a kick out of doing outrageous things. And tonight, the outrageous thing that I'm doing is to invite us to contemplate the prospect of living with dementia. And that is countercultural, transgressive. I don't know what other words there are, but I'm going to ask you, I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to ask you to fill in these two sentence stems. So here's the first part of the sentence. When I get dementia, I fear. And when I get dementia, I hope. So I'm going to invite you to just be with that. I know it's already not an easy thing. And when you're ready, if you want to just drop something in the chat of just the first one. When I get dementia, I fear. So fears, feeling inhuman. My friends won't want to see me or talk with me. Being abandoned. Losing myself. Losing my autonomy. Maybe I won't recognize my kids. Maybe I won't be able to love my family. Maybe I'll be alone. Maybe I'll be taken advantage of. Maybe I'll be treated like I'm not even here. People will speak about me in the third person. Maybe I won't have anybody around that I can trust. I love this. I'll be seen as missing in action. I'll feel like a burden. So those are a lot of really big fears. And I brought this list of fears from a wonderful Ann Basting, whose work will be cited on a handout that's going to be sent out after the workshop tonight. I mean, not tonight, but probably tomorrow. So I think most of these have been covered in some way. Maybe the one that's not is the fear of a meaningless existence. And that's a really big one. Yeah, I was just going to show you this list of fears, many of which are exactly what you all came up with. So if this is so scary, why am I asking us to take this imaginative leap? Someone said in the chat, facing it alone is a big fear, which could mean two things. Facing it all by myself is a big fear, or just facing it, just saying those words, when I have dementia or when I get dementia. So here's why I'm inviting us to take this imaginative leap. First of all of us are going to be contending with dementia. Maybe it won't be us, but as Peter Whitehouse, a really amazing neuroscientist who's kind of become a radical, but started in the conventional, let's just cure dementia with drugs camp, says, we've learned that as one grows older, dementia becomes more common to the point that we might all be affected if we live long enough. So it very well could be us, but if it's not us, it very well could be our dear ones. So what makes us so scared? What is it about dementia that's so scary? I'm going to say that we have a cultural narrative around this that is based in what has been called our hypercognitive approach to life. We think we are our brains. So the idea that something would happen to my brain presents immediately the idea that I'm no longer me or no longer here. The tragedy narrative suggests that dementia makes a person into a non-person, that a person with dementia is just an empty vessel with no agency, no story. And I want to suggest that the tragedy narrative comes from fear, and it also prompts fear. And it also depersonalizes people with dementia in the meantime. If we're putting all that fear and terror and tragedy about dementia, how are we supposed to be when we're in an encounter with a person who has what's sometimes called more kindly forgetfulness? Wait 1 second. So I want to see if we can develop a more complex narrative about dementia. Because to just be in the place of dread and denial is actually, although really common, really costly. A wonderful, wonderful writer, Christian minister, Lynn Castile Harper says, perhaps more than other conditions, dementia brings our fundamental lack of ultimate control over our lives and their endings to a head. So in Castile Harper's view, dementia is like the sort of personification of everything that's scary. Being out of control, stopping to exist, all of that. But I also want to say that when we deny or when we resist, when we distance ourselves, that makes things harder. What do I mean? If, for example, a parent is developing dementia and we don't talk about it and we don't acknowledge it, then we're not able to get that person's input about what they might want. We don't let them join us in the fact that they're scared. We actually create distance and we harden to the experience that we might approach with softness and curiosity. In Buddhist tradition, I'm a rabbi, but I'm going to quote Buddhist tradition. There's this idea called the second arrow. So when you get wounded, there's the first arrow, which is when you actually get wounded by something, let's say an arrow. And then there's the second arrow, which is when you say, "Oi, I'm so hurt. This is the worst thing that ever happened to me. What am I going to do now? What's my life going to be like? Oh my God, I don't know what I'm going to do. Who's going to help me?" That's the second arrow, which according to the Buddhist tradition is what causes more suffering actually than the thing itself. So in the case of dementia, what I'm suggesting is that developing forgetfulness, developing cognitive loss is scary and it involves loss, but all of the dread and all the narrative that we put around it makes it much worse. So that is why I've invited you to this. So I said we want to open to the complexity of dementia. Let's go back to the prompt that I asked you in the beginning, which is, when I get dementia, I hope, ... And I'll invite you to put things in the chat. And meanwhile, I want to just acknowledge that Hillel in the chat asked, how do I define dementia? I'm defining dementia as cognitive, a loss of cognitive intactness that could be in several different formats. For example, the most common is Alzheimer's disease, but that's not the only one. You could have what's called vascular dementia, which they used to call hardening of the arteries, where it's really part of cardiovascular disease. You could have some of the rarer forms like the frontal temporal dementia. So when I talk about dementia, I'm talking about this whole range of cognitive impairment. So hopes are coming. I hope people will be kind to me. I hope people will love me. I hope that my dear ones won't be afraid to spend time with me. I hope I'll be able to do things I love. Okay. Michael says, I hope to have wild parties with our favorite music. Our kids will have kept track of our favorite songs and playlist. Rochelle says, I hope I'll be courageous enough to publicly share about the experience in order to help others. Wouldn't that be great? I hope I can still enjoy life. I hope to accept. So these are great. They're really, really great. I hope there'll be a roof over my head. I hope I'll be good-natured and not angry. Having worked with hundreds and hundreds of people who have dementia, I used to play this game with myself. Which one will I be? You know, and I really didn't want to be the one who was like saying, the bastards, the bastards, the bastards, but I was afraid. And I don't know, but I'm hoping that maybe I can cultivate some midot, some soul traits that will make it more likely that I won't be that person. I hope I have someone who follows my wishes that I've expressed before dementia sets in. Okay, so this I hope feels already different just to switch and put in the same sentence when I get dementia and I hope. So let's just talk a little bit about the experience of dementia, and then I want to introduce you to a kind of tool from Jewish tradition that I think can perhaps help us to prepare for the experience of dementia. Okay. So I want to suggest that dementia is not just unremitting tragedy, that it's more complex. And here's a bit of what I've learned. First, I want to say that dementia is like wandering in the Midbar, in the wilderness, like our people did for 40 years. And if you think about wandering in the Midbar, you're can be subject to confusion. There aren't guideposts to tell you what's next, and it can sometimes be lonely. Time changes when you're living with dementia. You can't really live in anything but the present moment because the past, you can't go back. Maybe there's no one around who shares your past or knows it. Maybe you don't remember it. And you don't have access to the future, among other reasons, than because what's definitely ahead is moving toward the end of life. And most people around you don't want to talk about that. It's like you bought your ticket for a trip, but nobody wants to talk about the trip you're about to go on. But what you do have is this moment. And in this moment, even in the midst of the midbar, there can be oases of connection. So this is my mom with my daughter's dogs. And my mom, in her place of midbar, is mostly having a great time. She is full of joie de vivre and just happy with whatever's happening. My son says, I really like dementia grandma. She's a lot more fun than the other grandma was before. So that might not be what our image is, but maybe it can be having a great time if we're lucky. This is my friend's father, who was in a, I think, kind of a depressing nursing home, but they had this cage with lovebirds in it. And her father couldn't talk at all anymore. My friend would just go and sit with her dad for hours on end, looking at the lovebirds. And in that moment, they were connected and they didn't need the hi, how are yous and the kind of more superficial ways that we often connect with one another. they just were with this beautiful piece of nature and each other's presence. So being in the present moment can really be an oasis. Of course, if the present moment is rotten, that's all you have too, and that's really hard. And you're vulnerable when you are in the mead bar. The brilliant social psychologist Thomas Kitwood said that people who are living with dementia are vulnerable to dehumanization, which we all have seen, no doubt. But some of the forms of dehumanization that he mentioned, among about 14 of them, were these: deception. There's something called therapeutic lying or something where, oh, it's okay to tell a person a fib because it's for their own good. Well, that can be dehumanizing, especially if, for example, someone close to you died and they're not telling you, which I have seen, and that's just appalling. I believe that we know it in our bones. Disempowerment, where you're not given choices over the simplest things about your daily life. Infantilization, maybe people are calling you by a nickname you would never have chose, or they're calling you sweetie or honey, or they are giving you a baby doll to play with when you are 92 years old and very intelligent and dignified. And finally, objectification. Maybe the people taking care of you are treating you like a series of tasks. Renee Rose Shield is an anthropologist, and she wrote a study of a nursing home, and she observed the staff treating what they were doing as what she called bed and body work. Oh, I got to do the wake up in room 43, or I have to do the toileting in room 24, as opposed to I'm going to take care of Mrs. Gold or whatever it is. So that's a really terrible and dehumanizing fate. One term for this is dementism, prejudice against the deeply forgetful. That's Dr. Stephen Post. So personally, I want to prepare for dementia to help myself to have ease, should that be my path. And I want to prepare for dementia to help those who will care for me to have ease. One of the things that happens as a result of not avoiding is that we can have conversations, just like in What Matters, there are conversations about end-of-life choices. Well, I can have conversations with my children about, if I have dementia, I want you to know that there might come a time when I can't live in the setting that I want to live in. Of course, I want to stay home. I want to be in my own house, but I give you permission, adult child of mine, to, when that is not feasible, make another decision. And I do not want you to feel guilty about it. You have my blessing, even though at the time I may not be able to say that. That is a way of easing the path. So what I've been searching for and thinking about, well, how could we prepare for dementia? If we know that it very possibly may happen, how can we find some sort of a spiritual framework or a set of tools that will help us to be able to cope with dementia when it comes across our path? And thinking about this, I remembered the following teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism. So the Baal Shem Tov lived in Poland in the 18th century, had a threefold approach to what he called foreign thoughts or strange thoughts in prayer. In other words, distractions. But he said that this idea that I'm going to share with you, this approach, is actually a way to respond to experiences that are unbidden or unwelcome. And I just love that this man was thinking about how is it that I prepare my neshama, my soul, to be able to face something that I really don't ask for, really don't want. So he has 3 domains of response. I'm not sure I want to call them steps because I don't think they're probably linear. But the first one is called hachna'ah. Hachna'ah means surrendering, yielding. I like to say softening to what is. The second, and we'll go into this in more detail, is called Havdalah. And many of us know the word Havdalah because it's the ceremony in which we distinguish between Shabbat and the week. But Havdalah also means making a distinction or discerning. And I feel like the quality that comes with Havdalah is curiosity, being open to things being more complicated and more rich than we imagine. And the third dimension is hamtaka. Matok means sweet. Hamtaka is sweetening. And I think of this as being open to the possibility of transformation in the midst of this unwelcome experience. So those are the 3. Let's look at them one at a time. Hachna'ah, softening to reality. Maybe this is acceptance. You know, maybe this is what Tara Brach means when she talks about radical acceptance. I admit that this is what there is and I can't change it. No amount of wishing it weren't so will make a distinction or a difference. In Hebrew, there's a saying, Ze ma sheyesh. This is what there is. And I think that's what is involved with hachna'ah. So in the case of dementia, for example, if my brother comes to visit my mom and she says, well, you know, I might move to Philadelphia, but I haven't done it yet. And he says, Mom, you moved to Philadelphia. This is your apartment. This is where you're living. He's not accepting that she is not capable of perceiving that reality. He's gonna bring her along. He's gonna get her into this consensual reality that we're in. And he's now in a fight. What's her name? You're all gonna, some of you will know who she is. Byron Katie says, whenever I fight reality, I lose, but only 100% of the time. So can I look at what is and take in what is? That's hachna'ah. Havdalah. Well, that maybe this is still hachna'ah, surrendering expectations, but I don't want it to be this way. This isn't what I expected. I thought I would be with my beloved and we would both be totally present till the end of time. And now I'm living with someone who has cognitive impairment, let's say. Well, yeah, we didn't order this up. So this is, I think, moving into Havdalah, to discernment. And the way I like to think about discernment is, here we are in a place we didn't order up. And I think about it like walking into a dark room. When you first open the door into a dark room, all you see is darkness. But as your eyes get used to the dark, you start to notice, oh, maybe you can discern a shape that's darker than the space around it. Or maybe there's a tiny light under the door. Or maybe there's lighter and darker places within the space. Well, that's discernment. So much more becomes visible. And if we face the unwelcome reality with curiosity, we can discern what is actually here. And, you know, maybe it's a little bit different than I think. Maybe there are, in addition to the really hard parts of darkness, maybe there are sparks of light to be uncovered. I like to ask the question, what's still whole? You know, that first time I walked into the assisted living and started singing Shema and saw that people who were, you know, very much confused and didn't seem to be present were right there and present. I saw that there was something whole that wasn't broken, that wasn't fractured or confused. And I think it's really, really helpful to ask that question. And then we can try to be with that. And in this context of a Jewish conversation, it's worth remembering that we're all beings made in the divine image. We're not made in the image of the brain. We're made in the image of the divine, which means that even a person who is confused has a soul and has pieces of holiness and the capacity to connect in some way. And it might be really different than what we imagine connection to be. You know, it might not be a conversation, it might not be verbal, it might just be touch. It might be such that we don't even know what the connection is. But there's a lot more there than just brokenness and loss and darkness. Finally, hamdaka. I think about this as resting sweetness from the unwelcome experience. And I have heard from so many people whom I've accompanied. Some of us have the blessing of discovering in some of our accompanying qualities and traits that weren't so evident before, like my son talking about dementia grandma. You know, it can go the other way too. Sometimes people who were so sweet and proper become disinhibited, and that's really painful. But we can be open to surprise and open to sweetness and look for where it is, you know, really seek that. I want to say about this before I move on that the Baal Shem Tov was not a Pollyanna. This is a man who had enormous suffering and hardship in his life. He lost a young wife. So him suggesting that there's a way of working with unwelcome experience comes from a really deep place of world wisdom and experience. And it's not, I don't want anybody to think that I, in suggesting this is a way of working with the potential of dementia, am suggesting that it's all saccharine sweet. This is a rough and unbidden journey that we might be able to wrest some goodness out of and soften the experience. So I want to invite you to do a bit of practice to just try out these 3 steps of yielding, discernment, and sweetening. Because my thought is that if we practice working with the unwelcome things that happen in our day-to-day lives now, while we have our faculties as we know them and we have intentionality, perhaps we can develop some muscles and some midot that will make it easier for us to face dementia if and when the time comes. Okay, I'm going to invite you to sit comfortably. Breathe naturally. Allow your body to relax as much as it will let you. Maybe it's possible to just relax the face. Let the jaw unclench. Let the shoulders come down from the ears and rest on the back. Maybe put a hand on the chest and just feel the breath come in. So take some time to reflect on one realm of your life. For example, intimate relationships with your partner or parents or children or siblings, or work, or physical health, or religious or spiritual life. So just choose one and ask yourself, is there something I'm avoiding acknowledging or I'm resisting? If you become aware of something that you're avoiding or resisting, notice the resistance. What does it feel like in your body? Is there an image or metaphor that describes it? Allow the resistance to talk to you. What would be the worst thing that might happen if you faced the truth? What would be the best? Can you invite yourself to soften a bit? See if there's a hope that you have about this reality, this dimension of your life. Maybe you want to express that hope as a prayer. Something like this. Source of life, who has sustained my ancestors and me, help me face whatever it is. Give me strength and courage, and guide me on this path whose direction I cannot yet see. Open me to the reality before me. Help me to be whole. I think to just, in the midst of an unwelcome experience, be able to take a deep breath and get curious is an enormous opening. You know, we may be telling stories in our heads about what we're facing that is not even what it is. So I want to end this part of our conversation so that we can have questions and answers. And I'll just share with you a quote from a Buddhist caregiver of people with what he calls forgetfulness, Nadar Shabahangi, who wrote a book called Deeper into the Soul. And this is what he says about the potential of facing dementia. For those who can truly lay aside their aversion or discomfort and learn to accept what is, the gifts of the soul await. Equanimity, intimacy with the dream world and its magical ways, slowing down to the speed of soul essence. So I love just the idea of promise in meeting dementia. So Sally, would you like to lead us into some question and answer?
Yes, I would be very happy to. But first, I want to thank you, Rabbi Dayle, for a beautiful teaching as always. It's always a gift to learn from you. And I know that we all appreciate that you've given us some nuance and new perspectives on a very complex issue that a lot of us think about a lot of the time. And I look forward to maybe you're introducing us later to your advancing joy concept, because those are two words that we don't often put together, dementia and joy. So can we leave a little time for that too?
Yeah, I'd love.
We end. Okay. It's just the insights you've given us have made us realize that looking at dementia through a lens of dread and negativity is not the only way to look at it, that there are moments that can be infused with beauty and acceptance and even pleasure. So I think I might take the opportunity to ask a couple of questions myself before I turn to the ones that have been put in the chat. There's been a lot written lately, and this is a question that follows me and is relevant to our work at Shomare Collective, since we part of our mission is to face and open up and destigmatize death and dying. When an individual, taking them out of this sort of day-to-day living in dementia, but is faced with a health crisis, a serious illness, perhaps life-threatening, where a decision has to be made about their medical treatment, whether to go through with it or to withdraw or limit or refuse treatment. When sometimes we read about individuals who have said that under no circumstances would they want to have any life-sustaining or prolonging treatment, that their lives for sure would no longer be worth living. It'd be devoid of dignity and meaning. I think you used the term meaningless existence. And so please do not do anything to prolong it. And yet the decision makers see in this person with dementia someone who's actually experiencing some joy. It might be just watching those doves. It might be having ice cream. But all of a sudden, it puts doubt into their minds as to whether or not the person who expressed their wishes before is the same person as they're seeing now. So how are family members and decision makers to make a treatment decision when confronted with this conflict? And how does your teaching help us decide, which version, which person, which time frame of the person to honor? Can you help us with that?
That is a deeply metaphysical, philosophical question. Am I the same person as the one who said, don't do anything or just shoot me if I get dementia, which I've heard so many people say. And then there I am, like my mom, smiling away, having a great time. My mom would say, don't ever make me play stupid games. My mother had no time for such pursuits. And my brother says the other day, he walks in and she's playing Uno with a smile on her face. So how do we deal with the fact that our preferences change? Well, in a way, this is the general problem or challenge of advanced directives, because we can never anticipate everything. Maybe what I was anticipating when I said, just shoot me, was that I would be miserable. I wasn't anticipating that I could have delight and joy and connection. So I'm going to introduce some other ideas here. The most important thing we can do, in my view, in advanced care planning is choosing who's going to be our surrogate. And they're going to be guided by things that we said about what we want. They're going to be guided by what they perceive to be our values. But then they have to look at us, let's say in the instant case, and say, oh, here's a person who's not miserable. So here's a proposed medical intervention. Let's say, I'm going to make up the case. It's an 88-year-old woman who has moderate stage dementia, and the doctors are proposing bypass surgery. Okay, so the pre-dementia person would have absolutely said no, because I want you to shoot me. The dementia person, just because she's happy and enjoying life, wouldn't necessarily say yes to a massively invasive and costly medical intervention. So this is what I want to introduce, is the two ideas. One is the idea of slow medicine, that just because we have our gigantic medical armamentarium doesn't mean that we always have to use it. If someone is 88 years old and their body is already living with what is ultimately a terminal illness of dementia, and their heart starts to give out, who says they've got to, replace the artery and fix it up from a vessel in their leg and go through all of that? Maybe the goal of medical care becomes different when a person is, I'm not going to talk about early onset dementia because that's a very particular and different thing, but let's say has what we used to call, senile dementia, old age and dementia. In the last chapter of life, maybe the goal of medicine should be quality of life and comfort, and decisions should be weighed through that filter. So that's the first thing I want to say. And the second is that within that, I find it really helpful to think about benefits and burdens of any given medical procedure that's being considered. And that's for the person in their experience. What's going to be the benefit of having bypass surgery? Well, maybe she'll live more years. What's going to be the burden? Oh, she's going to be attached to she's going to have a trach. She's going to be attached to a ventilator. She might never come off the ventilator. She might not return to her previous level of functioning. Oh, well, those are things we could weigh. So that's a long-winded answer to a fantastic question.
I haven't heard the term slow medicine in a while. And I think that coupled with palliative medicine, comfort care, quality of life is really something that should be brought into this conversation. So thank you for bringing that up. In the chat, when you were talking about fears and hopes, a number of people said that they have a fear of being taken advantage of or something along those lines. Or I hope that people will be kind to me, that I will still be seen. And you used the words disempowerment, dehumanization. So I'm going to take that even to a little bit more of an extreme. What happens in the case of elder abuse? Realizing that people with dementia are probably more vulnerable to different kinds of abuse. And here I'm talking more about psychological, emotional, even more so than financial and physical, other kinds of abuse.
Great question. And yes, we do need to plan for the prospect of dementia. That's one of the reasons that I feel like it's so important for us to do the work of kind of peeling away our fear and dread and resistance, because we need to ask the question, if or when I have dementia, who's going to take care of me? Who's going to be my surrogate decision maker? Not just about what medical procedure I have, but where I'm going to live. And I should also be thinking about it. And I might not have means. So I have to think about, what is it going to mean to find care if I have to rely on Medicaid, and what's going to be available to me? Those are not ridiculous things to be thinking about. And it's definitely important to think about who's a trusted person who could do that. And if there isn't a trusted person, is there an agency? And there are agencies who can help with that. So those are really important questions, and empowering ourselves to think about those things and make decisions and make our wishes known in advance is one way to protect ourselves. In terms of the emotional piece, in my experience, it is most common that even if there's a universe of potential caregivers, one person in a family, say, might end up being that person. And it's not necessarily the obvious person who was closest. It may be a person who's trying to work through a relationship that wasn't complete, and that may or may not go great. So, I think we tend to know who are the people around us, and it's important to think about who's going to be that person, and what can we reasonably ask of them, because sometimes people become abusive because they're just afraid and they don't have any more to give, and they're being pulled in a million directions. And that is a shanda that we don't have enough support for caregivers.
Yes, I think that's something we don't often realize, that sometimes abuse or neglect can be unintentional. It's just a result of the stress and frustration and situation that caregivers find themselves in. So thank you for that. And I want to take then a question that we received from the participants tonight, that takes that a step further about solo aging. So you're suggesting, make sure you find someone who you trust, or that a support system is set up. But what if someone doesn't have that support system, or doesn't have that person in their lives, that a family member, for example, or a best friend that they could trust in this situation? What can be done about
Well,
that?
that's where sometimes it's a social service agency who could take that role. Sometimes it's a relationship that we might want to develop, with somebody who's a friend or a neighbor or a younger person in our life. And, our peers tend to not be great people to take that role because they might be in the same boat. So I really just want to commend on this note DeRote's course, Aging Alone Together, in which people who are approaching aging as solar agers have a chance in 6 weeks to really learn about the kinds of things that we should be thinking about, and actually work on putting things in place in one's life for that.
We have a question about what the benefits of telling someone with dementia about the loss of a spouse, or someone close to them or loved, who that they would keep asking about because they don't remember. And so are they experiencing the loss over and over again? What wisdom can you offer us around that kind of a situation?
This is something that I have seen a lot. Someone's spouse or child or sibling would die when I was working in the nursing home, and an impulse was to protect them. So, we could talk about this in terms of benefits and burdens. What's the benefit of protecting the person? You're keeping them from knowing something. What's the burden? They may know in their bones anyway. They see what the people's faces look like who are around them. They see that the person is not there. They end up feeling alone and isolated because there's something happening and they're not included. So I, in general, really strongly believe that it's part of dignity to tell the good and the bad and share the good and the bad. And people are a lot more resilient than we think they are, so what happens if they forget and ask again? They'll get to cry again. Well, isn't that kind of appropriate? So just want to say that's my starting orientation. Now, if you saw that the person was getting distressed every time you told them, well, you might have to think about it. But what I also saw in the context of a person in a care setting was that the staff were being asked to do something really ungodly, which is to lie. And that wasn't fair for them at all. So it's difficult, but I think that it's dignified to be included in the life that includes joy and sorrow, and that's a goal to help a person to live as fully in real life as they can.
And that would apply to other somebody is just asking about, telling them about their medical condition, or that it might be terminal. It's the same sort of sensibility about being honest and ensuring that individual's dignity, that they're
And
still
respectful. Yeah. Is this the time to talk about advancing joy?
I think it is. Let me ask you one more question.
Sure.
Go to that. I'm sort of taking us out here now and just wondering if we could think beyond our personal situations, but more communally. What can we as a Jewish community do better? How can we support, whether it's through our synagogues or affiliated organizations, or just outreach to those of us who might not be attached to an organization? How can we support individuals and caregivers and sort of counter that dread and denial that you spoke about?
Great. So one thing is we need to break down the kind of fortress othering of putting people with dementia away from the flow of life. I mean, even if someone is living in a care setting, there's no reason, for example, that they can't have interaction with younger people, that they can't go out into the community, that they can't go to synagogue if that's something that they would enjoy. And their concept for this is a dementia-friendly community. What would we have to do in our congregation to make it a place where somebody who might be disoriented could feel comfortable? Is it that they'd be invited to come to part of a long service because too long would be too much? Is it figuring out the kinds of experiences that might be welcome? Is it giving them a buddy who would be with them? I did this all the time when I worked in the nursing home, where we would bring in kids and college students and assign pairs of older and younger person and share the experience. And it's fantastic. I mean, I think that one of the things that's so important is to complicate the picture and to, the kids with whom I spent many a Shabbat with their older friends came to look forward to being with people with dementia. They got over the dread because they saw something else. So I think it's really, really important for us to think about how we create more contact and more opportunity to be out in the world and to be in connection. And the other thing I just want to say is that caregiving is tough and invisible. I know that Rabbi Address, when he spoke a couple of weeks ago, talked about ways of acknowledging caregivers. I just heard a really interesting custom from Ann Basting, one of whose books is on the resource list that you guys will get. She just created something called a care shower, which is for somebody who is entering into a role of caregiving to be able to be showered with love and presence and blessings. And I just thought that was like an amazing ritual and acknowledgement. Another thing I can say as a caregiver is that I've sort of made a team of friends who are there to relieve me if I can't visit my mom one week, that they can go and visit her. And that helps me as a caregiver to feel less alone. So I think we could help people to look at mustering. It's not just that you need your team of people when you're growing older and you need care. If you're a caregiver, you need your team of people. You need your places to be able to plug in and recharge.
So I think we should go away with this concept of a dementia-friendly community. And I think I read somewhere that you talked about approaching dementia with more confidence and heart. And I think that's, a lovely lead in to what you're going to tell us about, bringing joy into the conversation. So let us do that. And then I'll turn it over to Rabbi Melanie to conclude our program.
Great. So in doing the exercise that we did together at the beginning, when I have dementia, I hope, I heard some things that really touched me one time when I was doing it for some care providers in an agency. One of them said, I hope I get to go outside every day. And I thought, wow, me too. But how would anybody know that? So then I started thinking about all the things that I would want somebody to know about what would give me joy or pleasure. And I created a document loosely called Advancing Joy. And the idea is I want to tell somebody who's going to be taking care of me, maybe it's going to be the aide, or maybe it's going to be private duty companion or whatever it is, I want you to know, this is how I feel about nature. This is how I feel about touch. This is how I feel about social relations. I'm actually an introvert and I want to spend most of my time alone and kind of relatively little with others. Or I'm really an extrovert. I want to make sure that I'm in connection as much as possible because that gives me juice. This is what I want to learn about. This is something that I enjoy doing. This is how I feel about religion. I like music. Michael talked about having the jam and he was going to have his playlist ready. Well, there's projects where they put together what they think is music that somebody would like. I want somebody to know exactly what music I like. So I have just created it. It's still obviously in beta format, but I encourage you to take a look and to think about communicating these things. You will find the link to the document on the handout resource sheet that you're going to get in the follow-up email. And I just like the idea of thinking about when I have dementia, I hope that others are going to help me find joy in ways that are meaningful to me. So thank you for giving me a chance to share that, and I hope you all will find it interesting and affirming too. Okay, so I just want to invite you to take in and maybe, sing to. This is the last lines of the Psalm for the Shabbos day, Psalm 92, and it is really a hopeful blessing and vision for growing older. And maybe it can even be true for facing a dementia. Od yenuvon beseva, deshenim virananim hiyu. Lehagid ki yashar Adonai, lehagid ki yashar Adonai, tsuri velo avlata bo, tsuri velo avlata bo. May we grow fruitful as we age, ripe and abundant and sage. Keep our hearts open to all we face, present to goodness, even a trace. Renew us, let our spirits soar, sustain us, our rock for more. Thank you.